Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at one of the stakes races on Saturday at Woodbine. Race 7 is the Grade 2 Royal North Stakes, going 6.5 furlongs on the turf for older fillies and mares. And Craig, we've got a field of 11 signed on for this race, but it does feel like there are two horses in particular who are going to take the bulk of support, those being the number 2 Bay Storm and especially the number 5 Our Flash Drive, who has just been in great form recently for Mark Cassidy.
Yeah, and you could even throw in the third horse, A Day in Asia, who's only 4-1 on the morning line, and everyone else in the field is listed at 10-1 or higher. And I can't really argue with the morning line at all. I think it's probably spot on, but I don't think the race is quite that simple, personally.
Yeah, I think there are a few bigger prices that you could possibly make cases for, and we're going to touch upon all of them that we find interesting in this race when we go through the contenders. But let's first take a look at the Time Form US projector for this Royal North Stakes. And Craig, I wouldn't say there's an abundance of front-running speed signed on. I would agree that the number 11 Forest Drift, a long shot in this race, looks most likely to go to the lead. She's a little tough to make a case for, so if she comes back to the field, maybe that helps this pace come apart a little bit, but I don't think that either of the main contenders, the 2 Bay Storm or the 5 Our Flash Drive, are going to be hindered by a slow pace because they both have tactical speed.
Yeah, I would agree. You could even argue that Bay Storm's done her best running on the front end, though she showed some interesting change in tactics last time. I think the pace will be honest, but nothing that would sway my selections one way or the other.
Yeah, I didn't think pace was a significant factor in this race, at least as it pertains to the top contenders. Well, let's get into some of those top contenders in this Royal North, and we'll begin with that morning line favorite and take a look at her last race when she competed along with some other rivals that she faces here in the Whimsical Stakes. Now, this was on the Tapeta surface at Woodbine, going 6 furlongs, so she'll be transferring back to the turf here. You also see highlighted there some other runners coming out of that Whimsical, including Baby No Worries, Forest Danger, who we just mentioned, Owen's Tour Guide, and also Ambassador Luna. But Craig, Our Flash Drive, she was a facile winner of this race. You could see she traveled up well in hand, won this race pretty comfortably in the end by just under 2 lengths. And she's just been in great form since switching back to the synthetic for Mark Cassidy. And even prior to that, she was running some really nice races on the turf. And I think the big question for her is, can she translate that synthetic sprint form to a turf sprint?
Yeah, those are the questions for me. She hasn't quite run the same speed figures as we can see looking at the Time Form USPPs. So you have to wonder, is it the synthetic that made her slow down a little bit, or maybe it's the sprinting? And I also think that last field, as we're going to see when we look at a couple of the others in here, was really just a weak race for the class for a graded 3. And maybe she just ran as good as she needed to win, but there certainly wasn't a whole lot in her wake, in my opinion, that day.
Yeah, I will say her finale last year when she won that Best Arabian by over 5 lengths, probably a better race than the Time Form US speed figure gives her credit for, because she actually closed into a slow pace, and I think the whole race just got downgraded due to those slow fractions. But I thought she ran really well that day, and she's just been in razor sharp form. And if she runs well or improves second off the layoff, she is definitely the horse to beat in this spot. We'll take a look at one more horse coming out of that Whimsical, that being Baby No Worries, and she's a deep closer, Craig. If the pace does not heat up on the front end, that could really hinder her. And she's also a horse that has to prove that she can be as effective over the turf.
Right, and that's kind of what the case was for that whole race in the Whimsical. When I first picked that replay and saw so many horses, I thought we'd be looking a lot of them, but seemingly all the horses who finished in behind her would have to improve quite a bit on the speed figure scale, including Baby No Worries, to be competitive in this race.
Now, the main rival on paper for Our Flash Drive appears to be the number 2 Bay Storm, and we'll check out her past performances in Time Form US, and she is a confirmed turf sprinter, Craig. I mean, they tried to stretch her out a couple of times. They went a mile with her over the winter at Gulfstream and Santa Anita, and she ran decently in both of those races, but got a little leg weary at the end. The 6.5 furlongs just seems like it's absolutely perfect for her, and I think her last race might be a bit better than the result indicates because, I mean, number one, she was beaten by a really good horse in Caravel, but she also didn't get the most comfortable trip.
Yeah, she was bottled up inside for a good part of the race. I thought it was a good sign that she was able to show she could rate a little off the pace and run well like she did. And I was really impressed by her finish. The horse who finished third that day, Sarah Harper, had all the momentum on the outside and looked like she was just going to run by Bay Storm and easily get the place spot. But Bay Storm, once she got an opening, really dug in and showed a good burst of speed. So I thought that race was better than it looked. Better than that 114 speed figure.
She's been a horse that sometimes settles for minor awards more than she wins, but she always runs well in her races and she figures to be in the mix at the finish. Next up, let's take a look at the wild card in this race. That is the new face for number 10, A Day in Asia. And we'll go, I believe, 3 back in her past performances to check out the Sugar Cup Sprint at Ascot back in August of last year. And she hasn't raced since September of 2022. So this filly is coming off a long layoff, also switching into the barn of Christophe Clement. But Greg, she was in some really good form last summer in Europe.
She was winning a lot of listed races and handicaps. Didn't do quite so well when she stepped up into group company, but she certainly has the numbers to compete in a race like this. Her PPs are pretty instructive. It's worth reading the notes in time form that they provide, the extended race notes to get a real feel for the kind of races and horses she was beating.
Yeah, and she really did come from a series of losses to win 4 races in a row last summer. Like you said, those were mostly handicaps and, well, all handicaps, actually, some lower level races. But she earned some decent time form ratings in those races, and she is a confirmed 6 to 7 furlong turf sprinter. So it does seem like Christophe Clement is starting her out in the right sort of spot. Though Christophe Clement doesn't have the best numbers when you take a look at his statistics, as we have here in DRF Formulator, with foreign shippers coming over to the US from Europe. The percentage is just okay, and it's a low ROI. There are other trainers that have better stats with this move.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I started looking in Formulator, for some reason, I thought they would be a lot better. And this kind of surprised me and maybe put a little bit of a negative spin on A Day in Asia.
Up next are some of the bigger prices. The number 3 is Demo Dog. We'll take a look at her past performances in Timeform US. And she's had some stops and starts to her career. She showed promise early on, winning her first 2 races as a 3-year-old. Was off for about a year, came back with 2 races at Ellis Park last year as a 4-year-old. And now she's been off again for about almost a year, 10 months, I believe, coming into this Royal North. She'll be turning back to a sprint for the first time. And I'm not opposed to it, but this is just a tough assignment off the layoff.
It is, and I think those 2 layoffs have to be worrisome. 2 long layoffs, particularly coming off of bad efforts. Both times hasn't really got back to the form we saw earlier in her career before those 2. So for me, it seems like they're just kind of trying to maybe try something different, maybe start off her season, hoping she can stay healthy, but she's not for me in this spot.
I will say one positive that I found with Demodog is that her trainer, Kevin Attard, has awesome statistics first off a trainer switch, which is the case with her in this race. Up next is the number 1, Imagery. Let's take a look at her race going all the way back to last October at Woodbine. This was, I believe, her last turf race, and her last turf race over the Woodbine turf course. And she was a winner this day against optional claiming foes. And Craig, I thought she won this race well, but she was facing weaker competition. I think she has to prove that she can step up and be effective against graded stakes level horses.
Right. I wanted to show this race because it was at Woodbine, and I guess that would be the one angle that you would like, that she did run well over the course. But when you look at her Timeform US speed figures, it shows that maybe it was the class, because she's basically been very consistent, running within a few points of that figure every time out, just not good enough to compete at the higher stakes level.
The number 4 is Millie Girl. Let's also take a look at one of her recent races at Woodbine. This was actually pretty recent, back in May. going over the synthetic surface. This was a 7 furlong optional claiming affair, and this was the third victory out of just 5 starts in her career. She's a horse who began her career on turf, but obviously handled the synth here, so she can go back and forth between the surfaces without much issue. She's going to have to get a little faster, though, Craig, as she gets a real class test.
She is. She has a little better speed figures than some others. And the one thing I really like is how she's improved her speed figure every time out. Now, they've been gradual. We don't see any big jumps, but maybe that big jump's coming. And it is one of the longer prices in the field. I'm not totally ruling her out.
And another big price to consider is the number 6, Sweet Enough. Let's take a look at her past performances in Time Form US. And she's earned some speed figures, Craig, that make her very competitive here. I mean, she was a visually impressive winner when she won that optional claimer at Gulfstream over the winter. Since then, she's been in some really tough spots like the Pegasus World Cup, Filly and Mare Turf. And then since then, she's actually held her own against some tough horses in stakes races, runners like White Frost and Faith and Humanity, Market Segmentation from the Chad Brown stable, all of those horses that would be among the favorites in here. And watching her races, she's a horse that tends to get a little bit headstrong. She was a sprinter in Europe when she was competing over there, and I think this turn back in distance is really going to suit her.
Yeah, that would be the key for her. I don't know about that 20-1 morning line when you look at these speed figures, because she certainly fits. Maybe the turn back's a concern, but as you say, she has some history there. And her route races also have the look of a horse who would handle a sprint just fine, showing good tactical speed in all of those starts.
Yeah, I kind of don't think we're going to get 20-1 on her going out for Roger Atfield with Emma Jane Wilson up with a horse that looks pretty competitive, but even 8 or 10-1 might be fair on a horse who definitely has the speed figures and could be suited by this turn back in distance. So with that, let's check out our top picks for this Royal North Stakes. And Craig, I'm going to go with that price horse, the number 6, Sweet Enough. She probably has to improve a little bit to beat the likes of Our Flash Drive and Bay Storm, who are unquestionably the 2 horses to beat in this race, but I just thought she'd offer some better value.
Yeah, I can see that. I have no problem with her. I went with Bay Storm. I think the 6.5 is a perfect distance for her. I think maybe she's even a little better than that second place finish the Caravel looks last time. So she probably won't. She's not going to offer the same value as Sweet Enough, but she might be that 3-1, 7-2, and that would be fine for me.
It's the number 2, Bay Storm for Craig, and the number 6, Sweet Enough for me in the Grade 2 Royal North Stakes at Woodbine on Saturday. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.